Hello everyone, this is Many Ninja speaking, and today's episode is actually going to be a deluxe size one, as we're looking at one of three different releases recently put out by Black Hole Toys, namely being the Motorcycle Girl package, which as you can kind of guess from the rather crunchy looking packaging we have on the front here, is actually a combination of two separate cloned products originally by the SH Figuarts line, namely the Bulma Adventure Begins toy, as well as her motorcycle, which was sold separately. I believe they call it Bulma's Motorcycle Hoi Poi Capsule number 9. So, in order to achieve that, they literally made a package which includes basically clones of even the clamshell of both releases and kind of just mashed them all together. Just cursory look, everything is honestly looking pretty solid even in the clamshell itself, which, as I said, aside from one or two small additions here or there, is laid out exactly as they were in the original packaging. Now, as I'm pulling the figure or the capsule motorcycle out of the packaging, you'll notice that there's a little extra protective wrap on the glass on there, and that kind of keeps it protected from any scratches and stuff, so all in all, you can kind of tell they were at least taking some care to how these things shipped out. Mind you, that isn't to say that this figure, or this package, isn't without some QC issues here. As we first take a quick look at the height here, out 5.5 inches for Bulma, and almost right away I ran into a problem, at least on my copy, namely the foot falls off on the right foot on there. And the reason for that is kind of tied with what's going to be the cause for a lot of issues on this particular toy. While they're not necessarily as great as the foot falling off, because you can see the peg is not the right size, the opening is actually quite a bit larger, the majority of the figure you can kind of tell is slightly off kilter with its sizing, because for the most part its components are made of recasted parts. Now, for those who are wondering what I mean by that, basically the gist of it is, since this bootleg company did not have the original parts in order to make this figure, they basically made copies of everything based off a pre-existing one, and then recasted everything based off those copies. The general effect of what you're going to get off that is that the pieces, while pretty close approximations of what the real deal have, are going to be slightly softer in detail, a little more noticeable more on the dress and skirt and everything, as well as a slight bit undersized, which tends to play more in the factors to how the joints are going to fit in there. Namely, all the joints do stick out a little more than they're probably supposed to. Most noticeable around the wrists there, as well as the neck peg, which has some funky stuff going on there with how it was sitting on there. As you can see, the wrist peg is definitely sticking out on both hands a lot further than it should be. The elbows themselves should be more inset than they are in this case, although it's entirely functional. And, okay, the neck is actually just plain weird. And it's not even a case that it wasn't just properly assembled, much like the foot, when this came in there. Basically, no matter what I did, even when tinkering after the fact, I could never get the neck joint to sit in perfectly flush on there, probably without having to modify the toy later, which might be a thing I might do. Also, that ponytail does tend to come a little loose on there, just because, once again, things are not properly fitted on there just right. Aside from that, sorry if I glazed over there, all the joints themselves are fully functional, and quite frankly, good tight fits, and if you get that foot to stay in there, everything would hold its pose just fine. Still though, it's kind of annoying that I pay over $100 for the overall package here, and half the thing is kind of falling apart right out the box. Might just be a bit of bad luck, but a mere annoyance on my part. Now, moving on to side-by-side comparisons. Clone is on the left for reference, real figure is on the right. You can notice the slight height difference on there, and that's because due to the fitting of the joints, yeah, they're not sitting properly in there. That being said, it's still pretty close side to side here. Now, obviously, if you look at things like the eye decals, you will notice, especially around the black of the eyes there, and the widthness of the line mark, they are slightly thicker than they're supposed to be. And also the decals on various bits are unfortunately not as sharp as they should be, or at least on the bootleg one, which we're going to come back to in a second, seem to be a little more easily damaged. This is more notable on the chest thing with the Bulma here, as opposed to that one, because as you can see, that's a lot more beat up looking than what the official one has, just because we're talking a different quality of decal that they have sticking on there. And also there's some issues here and there with the paint now that we have a little better look on it. Also worth noting, the skirt issue which I mentioned earlier, yeah, it becomes a lot more apparent here. You can see most of the detail is completely lost in there, while on the much softer plastic or more kind of rubber finish on the real one, yeah, this line work is still plain as day. And of course you have on the feet there, on the shoes, a few more examples of what some cleaner paintwork would look like. Still, although, as long as you don't zoom in close as I have been doing this whole time, I'll be frank, it's still not a terrible representation of it. I would probably say that in terms of, the paint on tail is a little more different in size than I would have remembered on that one. But still, all in all, it's not a terrible thing. Trust me, I've seen much, much worse on this channel, and if you've been watching for a while, you've seen much worse on display here. And it's not a one-to-one copy, but it's still a fair approximation. And things can definitely be cleaned up. I would actually even go as far as to say that certain bits, we'll test this out in the accessory comparison, are probably going to be interchangeable between the two, because honestly, for the most part, especially the joints, are roughly the same size, so the joints are practically correct, I'd say. So, if you need something for replacement parts or spare parts, you might actually have an option here, if you happen to have damaged something on your real deal figure. Alright, one last little bit of observations on here while I have this particular close-up. You can kind of see how the joints stick out between the real and the fake one. Depending on, your mileage may vary on that one, but the one thing I don't understand still quite yet is exactly what's going on with the shoulders on the clone figure, because as you can kind of see, the real one does nothing like that. And of course, the skirts are noticeably different. Yeah, soft plastic as compared to hard plastic. Alright, with that out of my way, let's take a quick look at the accessories on here, which as you can kind of see, detailing wise, they're pretty close, although there is the noticeably different skin tone. Pardon me, as the footage seems to have bloomed a bit on this one, but you can kind of see that the clone figure has slightly paler skin, and while the decals are fairly close, although this unfortunate zoom in does not best demonstrate that, they're actually quite close on there, and it's more the actual mouth paint detailing that is kind of a bit off on that one. But they're generally reasonable fits. It's the skin tone that kind of gives away which one is which, though. Now, in terms of the hands, you're having a lot harder of a time comparing which one's real and which one's fake. And in at least one instance, I actually prefer the fake hand compared to the real one. Namely the ones that hold the pistols, which, okay, the pistols are kind of night and day. You can tell which one is the premium one, the real deal, and which one is the bootleg in terms of the detailing on those ones. There's definitely lost the detail on the guns. Dragon Radar, on the other hand, no, those are actually really close. I actually had to do a double take just to make sure I didn't switch these when I was putting these things back in the packaging. The Dragon Balls themselves. If it wasn't for that casting issue, it's actually hard to tell. Trying to get these in light so you can kind of see that they're approximately the same degree of see-throughness and same color. Same detailing. If it wasn't for that casting issue on the one that's on the clone figure, you'd honestly not be able to tell. Now, looking at some of the other hands here, it's more the decals are the ones that kind of give away which one's which. Because you can kind of see the blue and the number on that decal just kind of got worn off because it's a much lower quality print as opposed to the one on the real deal. And yeah, once again, I insist that if you really need replacement parts for your original figure, then what they have here with Motorcycle Girl will actually do just about fine, because more proof of concept, here's the pegs of the clone figure in the back and the real one in the front. While the zoom may betray me on this one, let's see if I can get back in focus. Yeah, they're about equal. They're the same joint, give or take, so yeah, you can even use these to substitute the joints in case the real deal broke. Now, what's going on with this little capsule here, which was kind of included as a little extra? I don't know. This has nothing really to do with the toy. It's just a fun little extra tossed in. The button does not press down, but if you shake it, there's a little ball bearing and that's in there. It's just more for decorative purposes than anything. What I will mention, though, is part of the issues they had with the recasting bits does appear a little in the in certain accessories, namely like holding the Dragon Radar. While you can get the Dragon Radar to hold in the real hand just fine, the peg is slightly shorter on the bootleg hand here. Not an issue with the Dragon Radar itself, but the hand that holds it. The peg is ever so slightly smaller by like a millimeter or so, which makes it a non-perfect fit. Moving on to the motorcycle here, it makes a very good first impression just from the get-go, to be quite honest on there. Now, mind you, there are a few quirks here and there, which I'll elaborate more on when we do the proper side-by-side comparison, but In terms of initial presentation, frankly, everything's looking pretty much on point in terms of the general color of the vehicles, the various bits and pieces. There's nothing that looks like it's standing out too much. Wheels turned like they're supposed to. The steering column works as supposed to. Kickstand works like it's supposed to, although I forget to show it in this particular bit of footage. And in fact, the only thing that sticks out as not quite a perfect fit is that canopy there. Mostly it's kind of an issue with the way it got casted. The pegs themselves are just a little too short. It does fit in there, it just doesn't peg in properly. The only other immediate thing I could think of off the top of my head, other than the seat in the back being impossible to remove, but that's kind of how it is on the real one too, is I noticed the silver finish, or the metallic finish, is a little more speckled, not quite as chromed as what it would be on the real deal. Now, moving on to Goku, just point of reference, since I happen to have him handy here, you can kind of see he does peg onto the seat relatively no problem, although I am noticing something weird about going on his hair and stuff, but we'll elaborate on that, once again, once we have the side-by-side comparison. All in all, aside from having to struggle with that stupid canopy, which as you can see from the short pegs is not quite fitting like it's supposed to, yeah, no, everything else is looking here pretty good. I think I maybe fix that with a little bit of a heat gun in order to just stretch that bit or something like that. But, yeah, if that's the one real issue, that's manageable at the very least. Alright, enough of the bike. Now the bike-related accessories. The skirt is once again hard plastic. Mind you, the lines are a lot better on this one, but it's still the wrong material. The hands themselves are entirely serviceable. There's nothing really wrong with the hands. Now how you get this on there is basically, for lack of a better term, you pull the base figure in two. Takes a little bit of work on here, it was a bit tight on there, and you kind of just slip the skirt on there. Hard plastic or not, it does manage to go on there without too much hassle. It's just a little bit of a pain to get back on there. But once you do, yeah, she sits on there just fine. Oh, as a general aside, I think I figured out what's going on with the shoulders. As it's demonstrated in this photo here, or this video, the shoulders are now in a little more of a pulled out position, which actually make them a little bit of a position to grab the handles for the hands there. So maybe it might be related to that, just to make it easier to grab the handles for the figure. Now, I don't recall the real one needing that, but at least it serves some kind of purpose now, and it wasn't just a weird thing they did. Oh, speaking of the stuff they had there, here's a version of it with the kickstand on there. So the bike is now slightly airborne, and in terms of the stand, entirely serviceable. It's, as I'm going to show you in the comparison here, basically a dead ringer for the real deal, unless you're really looking for differences there, which is exactly what I'm going to do. Oh, it turns out that the Capsule also has a stand of its own, so I still don't know what this is part of the package here. It's still a really weird addition. Okay, proper side-to-side time. In terms of general scale of the bikes, they are about even. Although now that we have the real one beside the fake one, clone one on left, real one on right, we can kind of see there are a few more differences going on there in terms of the coloring of the glass, or the lights I should say on that one. Namely that they are a little more clear on the real deal, and the clone figure have a little more darker look. Although in terms of the wheels and stuff and the steering wheel, yeah, or the steering handles, those are basically identical. They function just as well on the clone as they do on the real one. Seat-wise, almost the same, maybe slightly different color. In terms of what's going on the handle there, let's remove the canopy in a second to get a better look, but pretty close either way you look at it. Aside from maybe a little bit of differences in terms of the paint detailing, and more specifically the actual chrome color it is, or the metallic color. It is definitely more chromed on the real deal than it is on the bootleg. Yeah. Only other thing I noticed, the decals for letter, the font is a bit thicker on the clone one, which is the one in front in this case, as opposed to the real one that's in the back. Same with the one that is on the window display, although it's not as noticeable there. All in all, I'd say while the clone bike is not a perfect copy one-to-one, just because there are some issues with kind of paint detailing and such, and obviously the canopy itself, it is still a really good representation of what the real one had. Even down to the stand here, I had to adjust the lighting to make this a little more visible. The Capsule Corp is slightly thicker, and it's missing the copyright information on the bottom, but otherwise, these are the same stands. they are basically the same kickstand. The skirt, on the other hand, is a softer plastic on the real deal and has better etching, but yeah, that's kind of expected. And now, in terms of the Goku, there is a little more issue in terms of both the decal placement and actually, more notably, a little bit of paint here there, but it's the hair. There is a casting defect on the hair on the bootleg, so it is more noticeable which one's which. It's particularly that bang that's on the far left in this one has little damage on there. I'm honestly going to say I'm pleased as punch with this particular Burgess. Even having the real deal, it's worth noting that technically the Motorcycle Girl package costs about as much as it does to get the real bike on the grey market these days. So, if you missed the boat on the motorcycle, or you didn't pick up either one in the past, this is not an unreasonable way in order to fill in that little gap in your collection if you can't get a hold of the real one, or you just don't want to pay full retail price or grey market price for it. Next time around, folks, we're going to see if the Final Battle Jiren clone, otherwise known as Son of Ghost, can also live up to this same deal of quality. Thanks for watching. Catch you all later.